Hello, this is Dave Wood, and I wanted to welcome you to the Visionary Voice Report. Today, on February 18th, 2025, the Visionary Voice Report begins with urgent developments from the Middle East, where Hamas has agreed to release 6 Israeli hostages under an exchange brokered by Egyptian mediators. Multiple outlets confirmed that 4 additional Israeli bodies will also be returned, highlighting a fragile truce built on deep-seated tensions. Although some warn that this step might be fleeting, it signals a possible path towards de-escalation where fear so often reigns. Families on both sides now watch anxiously, wondering whether renewed hope can outlast entrenched resentments. The essential point is that even small gestures of conciliation, however tenuous, can illuminate new possibilities in a region long defined by suspicion. Diplomats involved describe a process fraught with second-guessing, yet guided by a desire to prevent further bloodshed. Critics caution that neither side has addressed the underlying grievances fueling perpetual conflict. Still, many remain encouraged by any evidence of basic humanity bridging historical divides. Here, international observers see how painstaking negotiation can at least shift the narrative away from perpetual stalemate. Hardened attitudes may resist reform, but incremental trust sometimes begins with a single act of release. In this moment, we spotlight a quiet breakthrough that could either vanish or evolve into a long-awaited turning point. A pressing domestic story now unfolds as the newly established Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, takes aim at federal agencies ranging from the IRS to NASA. Under the guidance of Elon Musk as a senior advisor, these audits seek out duplicative programs, inflated contracts, and unjustifiable spending. Officials conducting the reviews insist that each budget line deserves scrutiny, lest taxpayer money be siphoned off to bureaucratic inertia. Opponents argue that an outsider wielding so much influence risks unsettling the traditional checks on executive reach. The core contention here is that unrestrained growth can cripple accountability, requiring sharp oversight to restore trust. Advocates believe a vigorous private sector approach is necessary to unravel the tangle of outdated regulations. Detractors counter that hasty decisions could sideline federal workers' rights, leading to abrupt dismissals without due process. Yet, supporters maintain that only bold action can reveal long-hidden inefficiencies in sprawling government structures. Agencies under review promise cooperation, though some insiders speak of moral challenges. Fiscal hawks hail these reforms as watershed in fighting wasteful spending. At its heart, this push reflects on enduring conservative principle that smaller, disciplined governance can do more with less. A legal turn shapes the next development as a federal judge declined to block Musk's broad federal workforce measures. Tanya Chutkin, ruling from a district court bench, found insufficient grounds to halt the planned reorganizations, even though multiple states raised concerns about constitutional overreach. While cautioning that oversight remains critical, the court underscored that unsubstantiated claims of immediate harm cannot justify a sweeping injunction. The central takeaway is that efficiency reforms, at least so far, stand on firm legal footing. Skeptics worry that executive power grows unchecked when private innovators guide massive structural changes. Defenders of the plan counter that chronic waste demands urgent remedies, and the judiciary's refusal to stall these steps suggests legal confidence in the process. Critics nonetheless vow to appeal, saying rushed layoffs could endanger jobs and communities. Supporters, however, argue that inflated agencies left unexamined will ultimately cost far more in both dollars and accountability. Many observers see the ruling as pivotal as a test of how far an administration can go in streamlining bloated departments from a conservative angle. The decision affirms the principles that necessary reforms should proceed, provided they comply with core constitutional safeguards. Each step of this litigation highlights the tension between fiscal discipline and fears of unbridled central authority. Fresh waves of scrutiny also reached the Social Security Administration, where a senior official named Michelle King resigned after clashing with DOGE investigators. Her departure followed internal disputes over whether confidential records could be used to pinpoint fraudulent payouts and suspicious disbursements. According to insider accounts, King expressed concern that safeguarding personal information might be compromised by overzealous cost-cutting measures. The pivotal reality is that billions could be lost if the system never checks for funds issued to deceased individuals or phantom beneficiaries. Proponents of deeper probes assert that taxpayer dollars must not be squandered through lax oversight. Critics fire back that privacy rights are at risk if data sweeps become too aggressive. Official statements reveal that King's resignation was abrupt, intensifying debate over how far reform can push without trampling due diligence. Advocates for transformation insist that removing obstacles to transparent auditing restores integrity to vital safety nets. Detractors insist reforms must balance efficiency with fundamental civil protections. Faced with competing imperatives, the question remains whether old bureaucratic structures can adapt gracefully or collapse under the weight of public mistrust. Shifting to international affairs, recent talks in Saudi Arabia brought U.S. and Russian officials together to consider a roadmap for resolving the Ukraine conflict. Despite Ukraine's direct stake in the fighting, its leaders were notably absent from the table, prompting sharp criticism. Observers describe a diplomatic gamble by major powers who hope their conversation alone can reduce tensions, yet risk marginalizing those most affected by the violence. The critical piece of understanding here is that sidestepping a nation at war may accelerate deal-making, but can erode legitimacy and trust. Saudi interlocutors tout these back-channel discussions as practical steps towards de-escalation, though skepticism abounds. Some argue that realpolitik sometimes demands big players to hammer out frameworks before smaller parties join in. Others see an alarming precedent that weakens an aggrieved nation's voice, creating deep distrust in any subsequent accord. Meanwhile, humanitarian concerns persist, with displaced families awaiting tangible relief. Diplomats on both sides say that these negotiations remain preliminary, hinting that broader inclusion could come later. Yet a lingering doubt emerges. Can a sustainable solution form if the most affected party is continually sidelined? A parallel track of high-level meetings further underscores the precarious balance between urgent peace efforts and geopolitical maneuvering. Reports confirm that Secretary of State Marco Rubio engaged in lengthy sessions with Russians Sergei Lavrov to explore a ceasefire and potential frameworks for troop withdrawals. While details remain guarded, insiders suggest that both delegations weighed the cost of continued military entanglements against the possible benefits of partial concessions. The main point is that this conflict has drained countless resources, prompting calls to realign priorities and avoid further escalation. European allies watch closely, wary of any arrangement that undercuts their security or sets a dangerous precedent. Some herald this dialogue as constructive as a pivot, referencing prior standstills that accomplished little but entrenched hostilities. Critics, however, lament the exclusion of Ukraine, contending that stable peace cannot be imposed unilaterally. Strategic analysts also question whether any bilateral resolution will hold if trust is lacking on this ground. The practical outcome remains uncertain, but from a conservative perspective, addressing runaway defense costs through focused diplomacy may serve both national interests and also global stability, if that makes sense. Ultimately, each handshake behind closed doors shaped the potential for a less burdensome future, or, if mishandled, a deeper quagmire. Across the first 6 stories, we see a world wrestling with contrasts, both domestic reforms, fragile foreign dealings, unsettling legal battles, and flickers of hope where despair once ruled. Government waste stands exposed by those determined to protect each taxpayer dollar, even as critics warn of overreach by innovators seeking to streamline entire agencies. Internationally, superpowers strike uneasy bargains over lands ravaged by war, while voices direct in harm's path fight for representation. Hostage releases alight a small lamp of possibility in regions where hostility runs deep, reminding us that every conflict ultimately involves real families yearning for safety. Legal verdicts confirm some measure of executive freedom, but they also underscore how checks and balances guide the dance of power. When officials resign over data access, it prompts us to weigh privacy rights against the urgent call to prevent fraud. Meanwhile, negotiations in distant deserts cast uncertain shadows on allies who have yet to be invited, stirring tension about whose fate is truly considered. All these events beckon us to rethink the architecture of institutions that can either stifle or safeguard our core reforms. We stand at an intersection where moral clarity and determined action must unite, lest bureaucracy and indecision replace justice and accountability. The question grows ever more urgent. Will we claim a future guided by principled reforms or allow inertia to bury our hopes beneath deep layers of neglect? Yet even within the grand theatrics of global politics, a crucial voice demands entry. Ukraine's President Zelensky, who insists his nation deserves a seat at any table deciding its fate. He calls out Saudi talks and related negotiations as incomplete, warning that ignoring those in the crosshairs of aggression undermines legitimate peace. Official statements from Kiev declare that sovereignty cannot be bartered away by others seeking quick accords. Diplomatic observers note that excluding a primary stakeholder risks repeating historical mistakes, where outside powers carve up territories without local consent. Ukraine's plight resonates with conservatives who champion national independence, free from undue foreign dictates, though some strategists argue that great power deals can pave the way for broader solutions. Zelensky's moral stand reminds the world that genuine liberty must include the voices of the oppressed. Russians and Americans envoys weigh whether to revise their approach, mindful that any durable treaty demands buy-in from those who suffer most. Zelensky's firm position challenges leaders to question whether side deals can truly secure that region. At stake is not just one nation's dignity, but a foundational principle. No peace endures if it's imposed upon silent stakeholders. Meanwhile, in Toronto's Pearson's International Airport, a harrowing episode illuminated the resilience of well-trained crews and emergency responders. A Delta flight arriving from Minneapolis crashed, landed, and flipped with flames bursting along the fuselage, yet all 80 passengers miraculously survived. 21 individuals sustained injuries, some serious, but officials confirmed that rapid intervention saved many lives. Aviation experts emphasized the importance of routine drills, updated safety standards, and calm leadership under extreme pressure. Though critics occasionally call for even tighter regulations, supporters counter that current guidelines, if upheld diligently, prove effective at containing crises. Investigators now parse the aircraft's data to determine if mechanical failure or pilot error played a role in the near disaster. For travelers, this incident underscores that vigilance, training, and coherent protocols can reduce the worst risks without drowning airlines and stifling mandates. Families shaken by the ordeal express relief that such a shocking incident was not more tragic. Despite the chaos, a successful rescue offers a testament to the power of practical preparedness over complacency. And for a public wary of endless controversies, it serves as a reminder that good procedures, well implemented, can foster real hope in moments of peril. A shifting economic landscape provides its own jolt as multiple corporations, among them Southwest Airlines, Meta, Microsoft, and Chevron, announce substantial layoffs. Market analysts link these cutbacks partly to expanding automation and AI-driven efficiencies, which reduce the need for certain jobs. Executives argue that embracing new technologies is essential for long-term growth, yet tens of thousands of workers now face a difficult transition. The central question is whether short-term upheaval can translate into broader opportunity when companies reconfigure their labor forces. Critics worry that corporate boards prize profit margins over human capital, leaving entire communities vulnerable. Advocates of free market solutions believe that innovation, when unshackled, ultimately creates fresh avenues for employment. Anxiety still runs high among those abruptly let go, many of whom doubt they can easily pivot to new industries. Economists note that cycles of creative destruction often bring unintended consequences, forcing government leaders to weigh support measures. Within conservative circles, the prevailing stance is that targeted retraining and entrepreneurial freedom can best address these disruptions. Large-scale layoffs highlight the ongoing debate over balancing technological progress with responsibility to American workers. Whether these job losses pave the way for stronger, more competitive enterprises remains an open question. Further underscoring global tensions, Chinese regulators have restricted Tesla's ability to deploy advanced self-driving systems in their market. Officials cite national security concerns, hinting that cutting-edge technology from U.S. companies requires stricter oversight. Observers suspect this move also operates as leverage in ongoing trade disputes between Washington and Beijing. At its core, the standstill reveals how innovation can become a geopolitical flashpoint, especially when intellectual property and automation intertwine. Advocates of robust American enterprise insist that foreign barriers highlight the danger of overdependence on adversarial states. Others stress that China wields considerable economic clout and that reciprocal fairness may be elusive without firm international agreements. Tesla's leadership remains tight-lipped, but acknowledges the potential economic fallouts of losing ground in the world's largest auto market. Critics question whether national policies that limit technological imports might stifle progress and harm consumers. Conservative perspectives assert that sovereignty over strategic tech sectors is paramount, and any nation can set its own rules within reason. Meanwhile, tech analysts say this dispute reflects a broader pattern where global commerce meets heightened nationalism. Tension remains high, and many wonder whether free market ideals can truly flourish when protectionist reflexes tighten around cutting-edge innovation. Gathering the threads of these stories reveals a world that stands on the cusp of defining its future through decisions both small and also monumental. We've seen hostages freed by precarious truce, lawmakers and judges wrestle with government overreach, negotiators shaping or sidestepping entire nations, and data-driven audits that promise either redemption or disruption. Energy in the private sector sparks growth, yet triggers layoffs, leaving families uncertain about tomorrow. Subtle or overt, conflict resonates in every corner, from desert standoffs to domestic showdowns, while technology now underpins everything we do. What emerges is a narrative about the delicate interplay between power and principle, efficiency and empathy, sovereignty and shared burdens. Conservative thought emphasizes personal responsibility and prudent management of public funds, but it also recognizes that authentic leadership must hear the voices closest to adversity. Whether we speak of Israelis or Palestinians, executives or employees, Americans or foreign citizens, the call remains to handle each crisis with clear-eyed resolve and moral conviction. At this juncture, we can choose to let cynicism proliferate or spark renewal by holding leaders accountable for every promise and policy. The unifying lesson is that freedom thrives not through complacent institutions, but through honest reflection, rigorous stewardship, and unwavering respect for the rights of the people. Still, no course is set in stone unless we turn principle into action, a commitment that resonates across geopolitical lines. Many look to Ukraine's excluded voice as a reminder that justice often depends on who is invited to the dialogue. Others point to each saved passenger in Toronto as evidence that disciplined procedures followed diligently can avert catastrophe. Oversight boards investigating federal agencies continue to unearth ways to serve the public without burying initiatives under endless paperwork. The eyes of the international community linger on negotiations that strain to reduce conflict without sacrificing smaller allies. Wealth shifts as layoffs reshape corporate structures, leaving open questions about how innovation can best serve the broader public ground. From a conservative standpoint, all these challenges, they circle back to the notion that common sense policies, local empowerment, and transparent accountability pave the best path forward. This report contends that behind every crisis lies an opportunity for decisive reform, and behind every success stands an example of determined leadership. Whether addressing airport emergencies or diplomatic amazes, the consistent thread is that endurance grows where integrity prevails. We close on this note. Let these stories fuel a fresh sense of purpose rather than fear. Every viewer can stand for responsible oversight, efficient governance, and a determined refusal to accept careless misuse of our collective resources. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to spread these truths and keep our conversation thriving. Tag friends who echo your passion for upholding sovereign freedoms and challenging wasteful systems. Support investigations that shine light into hidden corners and defend the right of each nation to speak for itself. When crises arise, rally around quick, effective responses that spare innocent lives. Harness the potential of technology while insisting on fair practices at home and abroad. Join us in expecting leadership that never cowers from bold change, yet stands firm on time-tested values. This is the Visionary Voice Report, reminding you that even in turmoil, solutions emerge where courage meets clarity, and that by embracing accountability, we illuminate a new era of promise. Again, this is Dave Wood. Like, subscribe, follow, and I will see you on the beaches of the world. I'll see you in the next episode of the Visionary Voice Report.